Can you guys just check the YouTube and see if we have that going? Hello?
You
Or you need the
haven't
link?
posted the link.
Okay, it's always on the same channel. But
Okay.
let me just close it now. The best video is here, really. On this general account. Okay, so you can
I'm
see.
saying like, yes, it's live.
Okay, thank you. So let's just start. So starting out. So now we have this. I just have to use that box. So we create two divs basically, and we just do a couple of things inside of that. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to do something like this, and we are going to be using position, relative, and absolute to do that. I think I did this a couple of years ago. This sketch part. Yeah. So sketch part with I. So I just want to kind of illustrate what we are going to be doing. And I hope I'm on the right side. Maybe I'm not on the right side. Okay, I'm on the right side. So this is what we are going to be doing basically. So I want us to actually do this, and maybe okay. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to do something like this. What is that? I want us to draw a big box. Then drawing the big box, I want us to like there'll be a big box, then a smaller box inside the big box. And don't mind my box, it look very ugly. So this box is going to be the parent box. And let me see if I can write parent box with this parent. If you can't see anything, just know this is parent box. Then there's going to be a child box inside of it. Yeah. So what you normally do is that whenever you give something a position of relative, you always want to give the outermost element that you want something to be absolute to a position of relative. So if you want this box, for instance, to be absolute to any element, and in this case that is this element, you will have to give this element a position of relative. And I can't spell relative today. Relative, yeah. So, and this is going to have a position of absolute. So the main idea is, because the normal HTML order is that things will get stacked from top to bottom. So if you have a,
Sorry,
yes,
sorry, sir. Please, could you come again? I just switched the tabs. I did not know you were presenting already.
okay,
Just come again. Sorry.
okay, I said whenever you want to give something in a position of absolute, and the idea behind position absolute is to disrupt the normal flow of HTML structure, which is from top to bottom. And I did something like that last week, more like creating 3 different boxes: one box, second box, and then the third box. And somehow we were able to manipulate it in such a way that this second box became the third one, or the first one becomes the third one, and the second one becomes the first one. So for you to be able to do that manipulation, that is against HTML, normal regular the regular flow of HTML, where you have an H1 header tag, then you have another maybe paragraph tag that is on top of that, then you have maybe a UL tag that is below that. So the normal idea is that by default HTML places this element first, places this one second, and places this one third. That's correct, right? First, second, and third, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And I think our sketch pad is becoming very ugly. Let me look for an eraser. Maybe I don't know where to find an eraser, but that's fine. Okay, I think there'll be an eraser. Let me know if okay, this is an error. So let's just clean the board. Where's the class captain? Class captain clean the board. So there's always a board cleaner in schools. Maybe you didn't go to that kind of school, my kind of school. The teacher always
We did.
okay.
I always hated my class
So that
captain.
means you also
Not
went
like
to Rumapara Community Secondary School.
no, please, I beg. Wait till me that.
That's where I went to. I went to that kind
I
of
went
school.
to
Yeah. That one was black, but I'm sure you guys had whiteboard. It was our one was blackboard.
FA is always whiteboard.
Yeah.
Always at the bottom.
And you
Children everywhere.
You bring chalk. Sometimes you have to bring chalk and cabbat. But that's fine. So let me just start all over again. And I think the pencil is so fat that I can't see what I'm doing. What is that? Okay, I think let's use a pen this time around. Hello.
Okay. So
when we have something like this, it's like these pens, this thing is too much. The shakara is too much. I don't think I will use this. Let's just go back to our pencil. The pencil cooperates better. Let me reduce the width. We have a visitor. Okay, so what I'm saying is we are trying to deal with position relative. Oh, wow. Pardon me. Position relative and position absolute. Oh, wow. So position relative and position absolute basically. And then always understand the fact that relative has to do with the parent, while absolute has to do with the child. You get that? What relative does is that, and I want you to just think about it this way. This is not standard convention, but think about it this way. That when you give something a position of relative, it begins to look for the nearest child that has the position of absolute. Do you get it? So whenever you give this child a position of absolute, so this is pertaining to child, let me write that. The child, and this is pertaining to the parent. Parent. This is pertaining to the parent, and this is pertaining to the child. So in our case, we have two boxes. One box becomes the parent. So let's say this is one div, and that's the parent. We use P. Then we have another smaller div, and this smaller div is the child. So this is also a div. So this is the child, and this is the parent. So when you give the parent a position of relative like this, it begins to look for any child in it that has a position of absolute. And the way you set position of absolute is that you first declare the property, which is position, in CSS, and then you do a colon, then you say absolute. And that's for the child. Then for the parent, you do a position of relative. Yeah. So the parent starts watching for any child that has an absolute position in it. And the moment you set this to have a position of absolute, it just begins to disrupt the normal order of HTML. It enrolls into that rebellious code where it doesn't come after its siblings like we've always known in HTML. So let's say you have, other children inside of this parent div, and you want to position this one in such a way that it doesn't follow that normal flow. You use position absolute, and the way you want to do that is by using the top, right, bottom, and left offset. So that's how you deal with position absolute. So after setting position absolute, you necessarily might not see anything happen, but that feature is functional for that child component. So you now begin to set the offset. And are you guys familiar with the word offset? Hello?
No.
So if someone says to offset something, that means to actually disperse a value by a particular value, or disperse something in a particular dimension for a particular range of value. That value that when something deviates from a particular origin is regarded as the offset. So if I say you should offset 100 by 20, that means you probably want to either offset to the top or bottom. So if I say offset, I'm just using an illustration. So if I say you have a value of 100 and I say offset it by 20, is either you add 20 to it or you subtract 20 from it. That's the idea of offset. You get it? So it's just to deviate from a root value by a particular value, a particular degree of dimension. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, it does. Sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
so when you set the position of absolute, what you are doing basically is to, you are going to have to set the offset at the top, right, bottom, or left, depending on where you want the element to actually go, because the goal is to what? Disrupt the normal HTML flow. So this element might probably supposed to be around here, but you want it to be at the bottom left without having to do a lot of padding, blah blah blah, all those unconventional things. Your go-to feature or your go-to CSS property is just to use the position of absolute. But remember that position of absolute goes hand in hand with what? Position relative on a parent element. Do you get the point? So now let us go back to the HTML. I know that this will make a lot of sense for now, but let's go back to HTML and just see how that plays out. So I'm going to do HTML and some inline styling. So let's just keep them side by side just to. Let me mute the person making noise. Okay, so guys, if you can, please turn on your camera. If you can, turn on your camera. It's a rule actually, but I don't know how to enforce this rule anymore. I've been enforcing it, but nobody's doing this thing. And then I don't even know where the cell came around. That's another thing. So just turn on you. You are eating. If you are eating, no problem, keep eating. That's one of the things I'm talking about. Just turn it on. But try to eat nicely. So you want to be one of those people that don't eat at eateries, because wait, I don't understand what's going on. Okay, that's fine. So if you are eating, it's fine. It's a big country, but you don't want to share your food with us. So let's create the first div dot parent box, and this doesn't have to be parent box. We are just calling it parent box. Then we are going to call this div dot what? Child box. And we'll do a couple of things with these two, but let's just go up here and do a block level styling. And block level styling means we are styling inside of an HTML style tag. That's what block level styling means. In code, whenever you hear the word block, it actually means what? It means a grouping of code together. That's a block of code. Do you get it? So this way now we are grouping this code together using this style tag. That's why we call it block level CSS. So we are creating a block using the style HTML style tag. You get it? So now let's target, of course, with our class name selector, which is the full stop. Remember, the ID selector is what? The hashtag. Then we also have a lot of things to enhance our combined selectors, such as this and this that select the immediate child. So that's fine. So we have dot parent selecting a class of parent box. So what we're going to do, we're going to set a width of 400 pixels, and we're going to set a height of 400 pixels, and see how easy that is. Then set a background column, or let's just do a background gradient. So can anybody remind us what we need to do a background gradient? A gradient.
Background image.
Background image.
Okay, background image. Then what?
Linear gradient.
Linear gradient. And then
90
If
degrees.
we want to
it
use
doesn't have to be 90 degrees. Is that the first what's it called is actually the direction you want your gradient to go. You get it? Is the direction. It doesn't have to be 90 degrees. 90 degrees means you're asking it to face top, top right. Yeah, I think that's that. Yeah, top right. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be 90 degrees. So no, you're actually asking it to face the left when it's 90 degrees. So you can do to 70 degrees or whatever. It goes 360 by the way. So we're actually choosing the direction that we are. I think we can say to right, I guess. So we can say red, then we'll say light. Let's not play with colors. So let's say light. Light. Okay, I think there's no these things. Yeah. So let's say that and see what. So okay, I think oh sorry. I think I wanted to do stop. I believe yeah. So the point is just to let you know that it doesn't have to be what's it called? It doesn't have to be degrees as maybe as you've been doing it. Sorry. I think it's actually to right, not to yeah. It should be to right. I don't know why that's. Is there something okay, that's it. So it's to right, you get. So we can also do 90 degrees, like you said, 90 degrees. And you can see it still works. So you can see it does pretty much the same thing because I think this is 90 degree back. This first quadrant. Does that make sense? Hello? Are you guys with me at all?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can also do something like to top right, I believe, yeah. So you see it should go, can you see now? It goes this way. Can you see that? Then you can also do to top left, I suppose. Yeah. So it just changes the direction. Does that make sense? Then you can do to bottom right. Let's do bottom left first. So you can see that. So you can actually offset it in whatever direction. Then you can do 90 degree or whatever. So let's just stick to 90 degree. I just did that to show you that's feasible as well. So 90 degree goes in this direction. The right goes to the right. So I think this light is way too light. Okay, so that's that for the parent div. So let me give the body a display of flex body. And let's give it a display of flex so that we can put this box in the middle of the body. Display of flex. And how do we put it in the middle of the body while using a flex box property? How do we do that, please? Hello? Hello? How? How do we do that? To put this element at the center of the page. I need help.
Justify anything center. Content center, sorry.
Okay, I should put your spec content in.
No, it should be display flex and justify content center.
Okay, display flex. Okay. Wow, thank you guys. You just saved my life. So how do we put it vertically?
We use
Justify column something.
align items for align content.
Align items. Is that align items actually? I used to miss that a lot. Align items. Center. But let me surprise you. Sadly, I don't think it will work. Why is it not working? I mentioned this before. What did I say about the height of any parent element that is a block level element? I said the height is always equal to what? equal to the height of his highest child. Remember. So in this case, the body is only as tall as the div. So if you do align item center, it doesn't go anywhere. The body, if I inspect the page, you're actually going to see that the body is as tall as this div. It's not taller than the div. So when you do you try to align it vertically, it won't just work like that, because look at the body. Let me reduce this. So take a look at the body tag. Can you see where it stops? Can you see where the body tag stops? Okay, so what do we need to fix that? Because we're trying to get to view the entire viewport height. So what do we need to do in that case? So we just set you guys don't want to help me. Height. We do 100 VH. And that's it. And you can also do 100%. No. Okay. The reason why 100% won't work is because even the HTML element itself, the HTML element itself is as big as the body itself. So what comes to the rescue here is 100 VH. So when we do 100 VH, you can see that works now. Hello? Show Shisha.
Why is the 100 VH pushing it down?
Okay.
Is it because is the 100 VH using the, let me say, the size of the parent div, right, to actually take a size to push down? I don't really get, because normally just the way you said that this div is actually containing the height.
The height of the div is equal to the height of the highest element in it. Does that make sense?
No. No, I get it.
The height of an element, this element that contains this element, except if you explicitly specify the height is going to be as high as its child. You get it? So you will assume that all this white space belongs to the body. It is until you now run into a problem that you should actually realize that the body is also only as high as the height of its child, its children. Do you get the point? Hello? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get you.
Okay. So that's what's coming to play.
Why the height that you did, sorry, let me take this. You did 100 VH. So why is it not pushing it down?
We've already set align items. We set align items, but it wasn't working. And it wasn't working because there's nothing to align. The body is as high as the box. So that it can't align it vertically because it's as high as the box. So when you talk about vertical alignment, there has to be space somehow for it to be able to align an item vertically. So initially we were assuming that this space was available on the body, but it wasn't available, obviously, right? So, but if we removed align items and we did 100 VH, you will see that our element doesn't go to the center. You see, it doesn't go to the center. It still sticks to the top. But when we do align items, then it goes to the center. But if we do align items without 100 VH, it still doesn't work. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And that's because the body is only as high, or any parent element whatsoever in HTML is only as high as the highest child in it, except if you explicitly set the height like we just did here. And I think at this moment, let's just talk about unit in CSS for a moment. So we have EM, which is they call it M. So it's relative to the font size of the element. You get. So EM units are always relative to the font size of an element, and we'll talk about that. Then we have EX. It's always relative to the X height. So we have, basically, in a nutshell, we have absolute and relative values for measuring dimensions in CSS. In HTML, we have relative and absolute value for measuring things, though these dimensions will be applied in CSS, but they are always, applied on an HTML element. So in CSS, we have relative and absolute and relative values. And the absolute values are, the following units. And I just want to talk about them a bit. I didn't want to talk about it before because of the confusion. But the one we've been using so far has been px. And px simply stands for pixels. And pixels, basically, if you've ever used a low-end device, you will realize that there's this small dot that makes up every graphics on your every graphical interface that you have, or graphical device that you have, like your mobile phone. There are always small dots that make the picture you see. There are always small dots that makes up this entire thing you're seeing on my screen. You get? And you hear the word pixels in camera. So the more the pixels, the higher the resolution that a visual device can have. You get the point? And resolution has to do with how sharp can elements appear on that particular screen. So pixels is the smallest unit of measuring those graphical, and visual interfaces. The degree to which those interfaces actually display elements on them in elements in with quality, or with higher quality or lower quality, is determined by the number of pixels that visual device can render or has. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yeah.
So,
Yes, sir.
so the most popular you see in CSS is pixels. Then we also have PT, which is more like points. Point is basically 1/72 of an inch. Yeah. Then it's not PY, it's PT. So we have millimeters. We have okay, we've already done pixels. We have PC, which is picas. And you can use all of this to actually, to specify your unit of measurement in CSS. So instead of 400 pixels here, I could say 400 picas. So, but CSS is the most popular when you're dealing with absolute values. So all these I've listed so far absolute values. Then relative values, and the difference between absolute values and relative values is that relative values actually, absolute values are absolute in terms of how they display across multiple devices. So when I specify this box to be 400 pixels by 400 pixels, it doesn't matter how small the device screen is, it is going to retain this dimension. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, so I have one brief question now. What if you don't give it any numeric value? Like, sorry, what am I gonna say? If you don't give it pixels, or you don't give it percentage, what attribute does it take, if that's the
It
right
doesn't
word?
take any
Well,
default
like if you
value.
just
It doesn't
put
take any default
400.
value. It won't work out like that. You have to specify a dimension. Does that make sense? It won't work. So is either you say, okay, you can decide to use inches to specify a dimension, which is RN. You can do this, which is very weird for you to actually use that, but that will work. You can see that this is an inch now, and for me to say 400 inches is actually a lot. Can you see that now? You get? But these are all absolute values. So we have pixels, which is what you would normally use when you are using absolute values. You use pixels, but there are people that explore other ones. So we have inches as well. So all of this, let me just write them down. These are absolute values. Absolute measuring unit. And measuring, they're absolute because regardless of the device, they are not sensitive to the width of devices. So if you specify this absolute unit, if you use this absolute unit to measure the dimension of any element on whatever screen, it is going to retain that size. Do you get it? So the first relative unit I'm going to talk about is, relative. I'm going to talk about is percentages. And of course, it is clear that percentages will be relative, because if I have a smaller screen and I specify that this box should be 50% of of the width that's available, that means even when I go to a smaller screen, it is still going to try to take 50%. Is that correct? So that way we can say the percentage is relative to the screen size. So if the screen becomes smaller and smaller, it's still going to try to take 50%. Let me just comment this out so you can see what I'm talking about. So it takes 50% of the space available, and it doesn't matter how small the screen becomes, it still retains that 50% dimension. You can see that the box actually reduces as the dimension of the screen reduces. You get it? But if I use an absolute value, it is not going to respond to a change in my screen size. You get it? And that's when I say beware of having absolute values to specify width and height of element, except when you really need to. You can see that the box size is not changing. Can you see that? It retains that size, so it's an absolute value. You get it? Hello?
So
Go back to that. Go back to that.
Confusing.
Huh? What's that?
I said it's somehow confusing.
Okay, do you understand what I mean by absolute?
Yes.
Absolute isn't sensitive to changes in screen dimensions or device screen sizes, or is not sensitive to that. It retains the size you specified. You get it? So if you say 1000 pixels, it is going to keep that 1000 pixels and try to use it regardless of where it is being applied or the screen it is being rendered from. But think about it now. Okay, for instance, when you have 1000 naira and I tell you to give somebody 500 naira, you get, or as you earn your salary, you made up your mind. Okay, let's just talk about that. Let's just do that. You make up your mind that on every amount you earn, you will give a particular person 1000 naira. So if your salary is 15, you have to give that person 1000 naira. If your salary is 1000 naira, you have to give that person 1000 naira, right? But if you say you are going to give the person 10%, 10% is relative to any amount. You get the point? It is not a fixed value. So whenever your salary increases, 10% increases. Whenever your salary reduces, 10% reduces. Does that make sense? But if you use absolute values, it's not sensitive to changes in the actual value that it depends on. Does that make sense now?
Yeah.
Does it make sense for everybody now? People like money.
Yes,
When I
it
say
does,
salary
sir.
now,
yeah.
Yes. It's better explained now.
yeah, because it's salary. You don't joke with money, right? You don't joke with money, okay? Okay, so that's that about it's not that that's not that about relative and absolute value. So we have different units. So I said we have for absolute unit, we have pixels, we have pt points, then we have, okay, let me just specify what each one of them means. So, points, then we have and I don't like the fact that this thing we have to keep. It's not being displayed well, but let's just, then we have RN, which is what, equivalent to inches, if that's how they spell inches today. This is equivalent to milli, and then this is called picas. And you don't have to even know all of this thing. Like, I've never used picas in my life before. I only use pixels and some relative values. I've never seen a reason to do this. So you get, it's just more like when tailors measure, right? When they measure, they prefer to measure when tailors measure, they prefer to measure in what's it called? They prefer to measure
Inches,
right? When carpenters measure, I think they measure in feet, or bricklayers measure in feet, right? They prefer to measure in feet. Yeah, they use 10 feet, 16 feet. So you can see that you can still calculate that same thing with inches, just that it might become so big and so cumbersome when you are trying to use maybe a smaller measuring unit. But you can always measure everything using the same unit. You get it? So it's just for you to pick what you're more comfortable with. For instance, now I can easily estimate how many pixels I need, but for pickers, I'm not sure if I can easily estimate how many pickers, because I'm not so used to using pickers to measure things. You get? So you have to just choose which one. So if you are coming from a carpentry background, you can just decide to go with inches, or you're coming from an engineering background. You get the point? Does that make sense? So you can always pick any one of these to use. You get? It doesn't have to be pixels for you every time. You pick the one that your eye, your eye can easily, measure. Your eye can easily, just when you look at it, okay, you can tell that, okay, this is about 100 pixels or something, and it is by the reason of use you get to that point. For instance, you have tailors that will just look at you and say your trouser is 40, and behold, it will be 40. So that kind of thing.
No, it's not rubbish for you.
But if you eat too much, it might not work for you, because by the time you come back, you're already loaded, and it just becomes a disaster. Most times it's always your fault, and some tailors will do more than themselves.
The tailor go collect.
Yeah, so that happens. Okay, so that's fine. So let's go back to our, okay, sorry, I was going to talk about relative values as well. So I said the first one we talk about is percentages, and you can see why percentage is actually a relative value now, right? Hello?
Yeah, we're hearing.
Then we have x, which is more like this is x height. I've never used it before in my life. Yeah, so it's just more like it's like the x height of the current font. It is rarely used actually, and you can check all of these stuff. Just take a look at W3 schools to actually have an understanding of these things I'm talking about. You might not so that's the reference to what I'm talking about. Does that make sense, guys? I think that will be helpful, right? So we have this ch, which is more like to the width of, to the width of the zero. So all these are just very weird for me, but we have rem. I use rem. So rem is more like relative to font size, to the font size of the root element. Then we have em. Em is just relative to font size of the element. And I think let's just maybe go over the important ones tonight. Then we have Vhw, which is the viewport width. Yeah. Then we have Vh, of course. We've used Vh a couple of times. Viewport height. Right? Then we have Vmin. Vmin is basically relative to 1% of the viewport. It's actually it's similar to Vh and Vw, but just that it is the way it is being calculated. It is smaller in dimension. It's for min is for smaller dimensions, while Vmax is for larger dimensions. Then we have percentages, which I already said before. So you can take a look at all of those at your time. But what we'll be focusing basically will be REM, percentages. Yeah, those are very important and always very useful. Then we've used VH and Vmin before, so let me just show you an example of VH. So we have 100%. Hello?
Please, I have a question.
Okay.
All right. For example, if we are to name the parent div relative, and the child as absolute.
We are coming to that actually.
Hello?
Okay, just go on.
I just want to ask a question. Based on what you said, when you adjust your screen, if you set it 10%, it's still also going to take it 10%. Do you get me? The size of the div is still going to be taking that 10%, since that's what you said. But I want to ask, what if you didn't set, it's going to be taking 10% if the parents have been set as relative, and probably what are they calling it? The child is being set as absolute, and it was being sized with percent. But I want to ask, what if it's just a normal div and you use 10%? If they adjust the screen, will it still calculate and take that same 10%?
Okay. For width, calculating width, relative and absolute are not consequential. Relative and absolute are basically for positioning. That's why we say position relative, position absolute. It has nothing to do with width and height. Do you get it? So if you set the width of an element, if it is a relative value, it has to be relative to the direct parent. Does that make sense? If it is an absolute value, it has to be, absolute in itself. It's not with respect to the parent. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let me just use the relative value for this box size, for instance. So we have 400 pixels now. So let's say we want to set, use to set the width, we want to use VW to set the width. So we can decide to do 40 VW. Sorry. And what do you think that's going to be? It is going to be 40% of the viewport width when you do 40, because the maximum you can get is 100, right? So VW is just the entire viewport width. So if you set 10 VW, it's 10% of the viewport width. And this looks nice. Looks like a candle. Okay, so does that make sense? So this is VW in action now. And I think what we need is about a 55. Does that make sense? And in this regard now, when I reduce this screen, you can actually see that it resizes with it. So that's the idea of relative and absolute values. You get it? So we're now using the relative value to set the width of our element now. And you can see how that is working out. And when you hear about things like responsive designs, these are actually the things you have to have in mind to be able to make your website responsive. That is when people view your website on mobile, it will not look like a curse or a reproach. It's still going to look okay because you took some time to actually put various screen sizes into consideration. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let's also apply the same thing for height. Let's not, and I say avoid using absolute values. So let's use 50 what? What do we use this time? If you are going to be using the B unit, B class unit. So I think what do we need to use now? VH. This one is pertaining to height. We have viewport width and viewport height. And don't be surprised that you can actually use VW for this as well. It is still going to have the what? Viewport width in mind while it is doing that calculation for you. Maybe that will be a disaster. Can you see that? You see it still works. But it is calculating 70% of the width, not 70% of the height. Can you see that? Can you see that the height is now blowing out of proportion? It doesn't look like 70% right. It is even beyond 100%. Why? Because we are setting the height at 70 viewport width, 70% of the viewport width. Does that make sense? So in a nutshell, just understand that one V mean, in the V way of the V dimension of measuring things, understand that one V is equivalent to 1% of whatever it is relative to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hello. So V is basically just talking about a percentage. So if we set the height to 70% of the viewport width, it is going to calculate the viewport width and set the height to 70% of the width, not 70% of the height. So for us to be able to do 70% of the height, we have to change it to VH. And that will make sense now. And whenever we reduce the height, you actually see that it keeps resizing it to become 70% of the height. Does that make sense, guys? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me set this to 55. Okay. So let's leave it this way. So for percentage, of course, all you just need to do is change this to percentage. And percentage will work very similar to, VH and VW. You just take the percentage of the direct parent. So can anybody tell me the difference between percentage and VHVW in a nutshell? Hello? From what I've explained so far, has the difference occurred to you now? Hello? Okay, you guys should brainstorm. When you're ready, then I think I'll get a response. Just give me, I just want the response. It doesn't have to be correct. And you probably will be correct. Okay.
Okay, so I think viewport height is going to, the height we set will determine the height the object is going to take. We determine the part of the body, the height of the body that the object is going to take. And viewport width, we determine the width that the object is going to take, the width of the body that the object is going to take.
Okay. Does percentage not determine width and height as well? Can we determine width and height with percentage?
Now, if you are looking at the last class where we separated the two cards, what's it called? How will I put it? This last project that we did,
Yeah.
that was specified percentage for the two, the logo,
Yeah.
the desktop logo and the text.
Yeah.
So I think percentage also has something to do with it, because at that point, I remember that we set the image to take 35% of the body, and we said the text to take 25% of that particular spot. So I think it's also going to work.
Okay. Here's the trick, and I'm going to show you with an example, an actual example. Viewport width. And remember, we're talking about relative sizes now. I think absolute sizes are clear enough, but so for relative sizes, this is what we are looking at. If it is relative, the question you should ask yourself is, what is it relative to? Does that make sense? So for viewport width and height, they are relative to the viewport width and height. Does that make sense? Viewport width is relative to the viewport width. And that's very funny. You know, this is what is the viewport? The viewport is this entire browser window, everywhere your content will enter into. That is your viewport. This whole thing, this whole white space in this context is your viewport. This entire white space. So what is the width of this entire white space? So your viewport width is the width from the beginning to the end. So now if you say this will be 55% of the viewport width, that means calculate from here to here. What is the 55%? That will be the width of this element. Then for the height, calculate from here to here. What is the viewport height? That is the viewport height. Then this element's viewport height that we specify will now be relative to the height of the viewport. But percentages on the other hand, is relative to the parent, to the direct parent, not the viewport. Does that make sense? And let me show you what I mean by that now. Are you guys with me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, bro.
But you understand what I just said, right? Or you're waiting for the example?
Yeah.
No.
No?
Examples.
Okay. Okay, let's say we want to give this one. Let's create a disaster from the beginning. Background color of white. Let's just say white for the sake of being right. Then let's do height, a height of, and guess what? Let's do a height of 100% VH. And let's do a width. A width of 100% V. So let me make this gray so it looks different. So let's see. Can you see what is happening? It is not relative to its parent. It is relative to the viewport. Does that make sense? Hello? Can you see what is happening now? So, but hello, are you guys with me at all?
Yes, yes.
It is using the dimension of
Yes,
the
sir.
viewport width and height. Can you see how it is overflowing away? It is using the dimension of the viewport width and height. So when you use VH, it looks at the viewport, the entire browser window. The width is the viewport width. The entire browser window's height is the viewport height. So when you give any element a VH, it calculates the width and height of that element from the point of view of the viewport. You get it? It is always relative to the viewport, not relative to the direct parent element. So let me give it a percentage. Okay, let me give it a percentage value and see what is going to happen. So instead of using VH, let's use percentage. And now it is going to be relative to its parent, not relative to the width is going to be relative and height is going to be relative to the parent width and height. So can you see that now? Hello? It's not clear. This one we are observing a moment of silence. The CSS die. Does it make sense? Hello?
Yes, it does, kind of.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't make sense. That yes is not convincing. There's no energy in the yes. Can I go over this again? I said at the beginning that whenever you use relative values, the question is, what is this unit relative to? Does that make sense? And now you understand what the viewport means, right? The viewport is this entire browser window. It doesn't matter how small it is, even if it's as small as this. This is the viewport, this white area now. See where your content will fit into inside your browser is the viewport. And remember that it doesn't matter, regardless of your screen size, that viewport has a dimension. It could be 1,000 meters, it could be 3 kilometers, it could be 300 meters, boys and girls, whatever the dimension is, if you did inter-hotspot, you understand 300 meters, boys and girls. So whatever the dimension is, the viewport will always have a dimension. So when you now use VH, you are calculating each unit of the VH for every unit of the percentage of the viewport height. That is for VH. For VW, it is for the viewport, but it is for the viewport width. Does that make sense? Hello?
Sir.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes,
you.
sir.
You are not giving me, that means it is not clear enough yet. Okay, at this point now, tell me, what is the viewport?
I think the viewport is the size. Okay, let's just put it this way. The viewport is just the size of your screen.
The viewport is not even the size of my screen. The viewport is the area of my screen where my HTML code will enter. Have you ever seen any HTML code that enters this address bar? It doesn't enter there. It's not a part of the viewport. Does that make sense? This area is not a part of the viewport. The viewport starts from here under the address bar down to the bottom of the browser. You get it?
Yes.
And even if your page, you can scroll through your page, your viewport is still always having this dimension. Even if you can scroll through your page, your viewport is the area or aspect of your page that you can see per time. The height of that is your viewport height. The width of that is your viewport width. It doesn't matter if there are more elements on the page. You get it? That aspect of your screen that you can see every single time is your viewport. So now the viewport width is how wide that is. The viewport height is how high that is. Does that make sense now?
Yes, but I'll ask the question. If
Okay.
you like,
Someone's mic is making noise. Can you?
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think it's better.
I'm asking this viewport now, is it relative to another viewport, another person?
No. There's only one viewport. There's no viewport. Any other viewport is a counterfeit.
That's a static dimension because you made a mention about dimension.
It doesn't have a static dimension. The dimension is as well. Okay, for instance, as I minimize my browser window now to this point, my viewport is as small as what I've minimized. When I expand it, my viewport is as wide as how much I've expanded it. So my viewport is that part of my browser that content fit into that I can see per time. So if I decide to, collapse it and make it smaller like this is my viewport now, this entire white space. So my viewport width now is here to here. My viewport height is here to here. So that's the idea behind it. It is just that aspect of your page, the wideness of the aspect of your page that you can see per time. The dimension of your page you can see per time. So even if there are more content below, when you scroll past, some parts will get cut off, some parts will be below still. That part that you can see per time is your viewport. You get it now? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear to everyone now?
Yes.
Okay. So now when I say a size is relative or a unit of measurement is relative, the most important question is, what is it relative to? So now we are saying, when we are using percentages, it is relative to the parent. And you can see now, let me change this to 50%. And let me change this as well to 50%. You will see that it will be relative to the parent. You can see that now. It is relative. It takes half of the width of the parent and half of the height of the parent. Can you see that now? Hello?
Yeah.
Hmm? Makes sense.
Yes, I can see it though.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but when we are, if we decide to do 50 VH, it is now going to be it's now going to be relative to what? The viewport, no longer to the parent. That means it might even become bigger than this element. It will become bigger than it because the viewport is definitely bigger than the parent. So it is going to what? You know, calculate its width and height based on. Can you see that it's no longer, is it 50% of our this thing? No, it's not 50% of the width of its parent, neither is it 50% of the height of its parent, but instead it is 50% of the viewport width and height. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
So the V is just like a percentage unit of the viewport. So if we say VH, a percentage unit, so if I say 1 VH or 1 viewport, width and 1 viewport height, what you're going to see on the screen is probably a dot, but that's like 1% of the viewport and 1% of the sorry, what did I did it to the parent box, so the parent box vanished in essence. So if I say 1% each of this, so if I say 1%, it's just going to be one small dot. Can you see now? It takes 1% of the viewport, not of the parent. So if that helps. Yes. So let's just do this as 50%. And the beauty of this is that when I do this, as I reduce the screen size, our elements gets reduced. You can see that I'm not reducing the height, so the height remains fixed. But the moment I reduce the height as well, it's going to change the dimension of the height. You can see that now. So that's relative units for it. That's how relative units work for you. It just keeps watching for the dimension of what it is relative to and keeps changing based on that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You guys are giving me low current. As someone would say, the current is so low. How far?
Yes, sir.
Is it working? Is it working? Eh?
Something like that.
Something like that. Something like that. That's no, far from the response I'd like to get at this point in time. But okay, don't worry. At your personal time, just go and take a look at it. But I think it's one of the things that you will actually be using a lot. Using it a lot. So, but I think I've explained more than enough. Like, and you're not if you are being honest with it, what is not clear, I can actually help explain better. But you just say, is it clear? Everybody keeps quiet. Yeah. So now we have this parent and child box. So let's go back to our position relative and absolute. And position relative and absolute has nothing to do with relative width and height. I just talked about relative width and height because I was using VH and Vhbw. That's why I decided to mention that point. So for the child box, so now for us to be able to do a couple of things, so we want to be able to place this our child box at this bottom, and let's just have let's have more children box. So let's call this one child box 1, or let me do 1 first. So for you to just see what happens. So when I give this a position of absolute and save it, so and I say top of 0 pixels. So you see what happens, it goes out of the parent. Why? Because now at this moment, this top that I set for this element, I'm saying that the top of this element, which the element is definitely a box, that is the top should have set 0 pixels away from the top of whichever element it is relative to. So giving it a position of absolute and 0 pixels offset for at the top actually takes it to the top of the viewport. Does that make sense? That is leaving no offset. If I say 10 pixels, it is going to be 10 pixels far away from the top. If I say 20 pixels, it is going to be 20 pixels far away from the top. Can you see how that is working? If I say 40 pixels, it's going to be 40 pixels far away from the top. If I say 400 pixels, it's going to be 400 pixels far away from the top. Do you get the point now? So now, we don't want it to be relative to the viewport. That is why we now put a position of relative on the direct parent, which descendant, or is it descendant, or which ancestor we want it to be relative to. So we'll put a position of relative here. because we want this one to be its ancestor now. So see what happens now. Still the same 400 pixels from the top, and see what happens. Bam. Can you see? It pushes it away because 400 pixels from the top is probably bigger than the entire height of this, this parent box here. You get the point? So it just offsets it from the top here. It's now calculating the 400 pixels relative to the top of the parent, not relative to the top of the viewport. Does that make sense? So guess what will happen if I go to 0 now? Remember initially it went to 0 as it went to touch the top of the viewport height. 0 offset from the top of the viewport height. But at this point, it is going to be 0 offset from the top of its parent. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And the way we achieve that is by putting a position relative on the parent. Are you getting that?
Okay.
Eh? So that's how position relative and absolute works. So let's say I want to put it at the bottom and top right. I just need to also set right to 0 pixels. So it's going to push it to the top right. You can say I'm manipulating how my element is actually being positioned across the screen. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I can also
What you want to put it at the center? How do you do it?
I
You
think
want to put the chat box in the middle of the parent
that's
box.
a crazy thing to do, but I think you might as well just want to use a display of flex and just icon and center, because doing this is actually going to be disastrous. But you can actually decide to probably calculate the offset, and there are calculations to do in that regard actually, because I strongly believe you can do 50% from the top. Yeah, I suppose. So you can see that. So you can just calculate your dimensions properly. Calculate what's the width of the box itself, this box itself. What is the width of the element around it? So you calculate that and use it to position whatever you want to position to the center. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. It does.
Yes, sir.
But you don't want to do that anymore. That's why flex boxes are available now. You get? Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but you have to be doing a lot of calculation, blah blah blah, for you to be able to actually achieve that. So one of the tweaks, and you can actually look at that when you set 50% offset and this thing. I think you will need another CSS property that's transform. So transform will do a and translate of -50 and -50, I suppose. Yeah. So I think that's crazy. But you can actually just manipulate the numbers. I guess let me get rid of this. So no, not that. You can manipulate the numbers to actually know where to make your elements see. But you don't want to do all of that. You don't even want to go through the stress of doing this. And the dimension can actually change. There is a particular dimension where if you do this, it actually centralizes your element for you. But there are other dimensions where sorry, what did I do? What am I doing? Okay. I think the initial one should actually still work. And I don't want to spend so much time on this 50%. That didn't work. That sadly didn't work. So, but you don't actually have to do this. Just do display of flex, just find content center, line item center. So it puts your element at the middle. So instead of, you don't need position. When you use this position relative and absolute is actually the point where you actually need to specifically put an element in a very weird position on the page. You get, like, put it in a very weird position, because I can actually and this let me just show you one of the nice things you can do with position relative and absolute. So let me do my top 0, bottom 0. So one of the nice things you can do here is you can set a border bottom left radius. You can set that to maybe like 50%, so something like that. So you have this now. So you can see that you have something nice like this. You get, and you can do a whole lot of things just using this position absolute. So this is like a trick you can use. So you just have this, and inside of that element now, maybe you have a card and you just want to say H2 and you want to say sold out. You might see this on social media on e-commerce site most times. You get the point. You can see things like this where you see what's it called? Where you see maybe like badges on top of an element where they just used to give you an information about that element. Maybe it's currently on sale or it is sold out or something like that. I don't know if it makes sense to you guys.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then you can do your H2. Your H2. Your H2. Oh, sorry. We are in CSS. But I'm trying to write HTML inside of CSS. So you can do a margin. I think this has a default margin, 0 pixels. So then you can do text align. And it's just so nice because you can just play around it and see what you can. So you can see this is one of the things that are feasible just by using position, relative, and absolute. You don't necessarily need that to put things at the center. If not, you might end up setting a value that works on a particular screen size, and when you get to smaller screen sizes, it doesn't necessarily work well. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir, it does.
So you can manipulate and say, okay, you want to push it to the center by force. You want to, say 50%. It keeps coming down. You look at it again, you push it further. But when you get to it, we are using relative sizes. When you get to a smaller screen and, when a screen that has the height reduced, you can actually see that, it keeps coming down the box. Can you see that? So you don't want to do that. So instead, just use display flex, justify content center. So let's take this out of the way. So we leave this box that way and let's change this back to 0. So we create another box in a nutshell, and then the other box we are going to create, we are going to call it child box 2. Yeah. So you can see that this one follows the normal HTML flow, because it's kind of, let me remove the text align on this stuff. So, and let me remove the H1 in this. The H2 rather, not H1. But let me just leave it. So instead of saying soda, let's call it top left. So for this one, you can see that it's actually rendered where it should be on the, on the parent. But somehow the first element is just on its own, wherever it wants to be. So we are going to give this child box to also a position of, we are going to give it a position of child box. We're going to give it a position of what's it called? Absolute. And we're going to give this a bottom of 0. Bottom of 0. And we're going to give it what's it called? We're going to give it a left of 0 pixels. So you can see now. So by default, even if you don't use pixels, I suppose you should just have it there. By default, it just uses it knows that you are trying to keep it at the bottom. And the reason why you actually see this space is because of the default margin and padding around HTML element. So let's just use the universal selector to get rid of the margin and padding it. No. And padding should be at the bottom left. So you can see that now. So we have two elements stacked on top of each other, but you can see how we are displaying them the way we want it to be displayed, and it actually works very okay. And it doesn't matter how big or small this box gets, it sticks to that part of the parent. And this is only working because we gave the parent a position of relative. If we don't give the parent a position of relative, it becomes relative to the viewport. Can you see that? This one becomes relative to the viewport. This one also becomes relative to the viewport. So it is with the position relative, we tell it the next ancestor it needs to go and be absolute to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So in this regard, one other position property we also have position sticky. Yeah. So I think what we will do now in this case is just yeah, we have position sticky. So let me just create another box basically. I'll duplicate this box a couple of more times. So just that. So just we have, and let me set this flex direction on our body to colon. Flex direction just to make this stack on top of each other. Flex direction. So they'll be on top of each other now. And then yeah. So in this case, let me just do a gap which is placed between each flex item, and the gap is going to be 40 pixels. I just want us to be able to scroll. Yeah. And you can see that we can't scroll because we set our viewport height to what? 100. So in this case, we can easily remove our viewport height. We don't need it anymore because we now have elements that span. So this time around, we can actually scroll. We can scroll all over. So let me just go on to duplicate that this one again one more time. So and what we are trying to look at now is position sticky. Yeah. So position sticky actually kind of okay, before we do position sticky, let me do position fixed. And to do position fixed, I don't know if you've ever visited web pages where they just have their navigation bar or whatever it is stuck to the top of the page. It doesn't matter where you scroll to on the page, the navigation bar just remains there. Have you guys come across something like that before?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try and do something like that now. So let's just do a navigation bar, and let's do a div with class of logo. And we're not, this is not a navigation bar class. I just don't want it to be entirely ugly. So h2, let's say logo. So we have another div, and it's with the class of links. And then inside of it we have ul. Inside of ul we have li. Just say that's crazy. Okay. And then we have link 3. Okay, so it's nothing special though. So we're just going to give our nav a display of flex. And let's just go to the top above the body. So our nav, let's give it a display of flex. Just put elements side by side, and when we do that, we have this. So we give it a justify content center. We give it align items. So just to put them, centralize them vertically. And let's give it a width of viewport width. Yeah, 100 viewport width, just to be sure that's working. Let's give it a background. Light pink. That's a terrible color, but it's fine. So okay, justify content space between. That's what I want. Space between, just to put them apart from each other. Yeah. So let's give it a padding of 20 pixels. So that makes sense. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to, okay, let's style our UL as well. UL. Let's give UL a margin of 0. Okay, I think we've removed the default margin with universal selector. Sorry, list style of none. Okay. And then let's give it a display flex of as well, display of flex. And then let's give it a gap of 10 pixels. So okay, for the nav, I think I added a padding of 20 pixels. Okay. Then let's also add a margin of 0 pixels and 20 pixels. So okay, I think let's do space around. The difference between space around and space between is space around take space around the edges as well. So let's just keep it this way for now. So let me remove this. Let me remove this as well. Oh, I think we need that. We need the padding. So let's keep it this way. So what we want to do is we want to fix our nav. So it's none other than position of so position fixed top. Okay, you can see now that it is fixed as we scroll across the page. It doesn't leave. But there's a problem now. The problem is that it is now behind the boxes. So how you fix that is there's a property in CSS called Z-index. And Z-index is just like, you know, if you have a background in graphics design, when you stack things on top of each other. So we have Z-index ranging from, I think, 1 to almost infinity. So when you give something a Z-index of -1, it goes behind everything. When you give it a Z-index of 1, you know, it stays on top. You get the point? So Z-index is just like what element will come on top of which element. So the element with the highest Z-index will be the topmost element. It will be on top of everything. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now we have a nav bar that has a position of fixed. You can see that as we scroll, it's actually fixed and it doesn't change. It doesn't move rather. Does that make sense? So let me just put the linear gradient on the navigation bar. And then you can see that our box is kind of behind the first box. So let's just set so instead of using padding and so on for our this, let's just set the height of let's say 100 pixels. Let's say 100 pixels looks. That's a little bit too much. So this is just for testing purposes. We are not going to launch the website. So we'll give this element a margin top of 80 pixels because it is the next to the navigation bar. Margin, that's going to be a lot. Margin top. Okay, I think we need a special CSS selector, and I think at this point I think I need to just introduce you guys to what we call pseudo classes. Definitely, you know, there's no perfect time to actually bring in that bring in that other than now. So there are something they call pseudo classes in CSS, and they are class names that you don't necessarily state. So but they exist and you can use them. They are available. So instead of, you know, we have how many elements have this parent box class now? You know, we have more than one element with this particular class. Can you guys recognize that fact? Hello? Ha. Can you tell me? Where are you guys? Hello?
Yeah, yes.
I asked the question. Hello? I asked the question. So think about it. I'll be back, guys.
Still no.
Triumph. Hello, please. What is his question?
I didn't even get his question.
I don't even know.
Triumph. Let's say CSS don't scam you.
Many elements.
Don't try to be like this. Be like this.
How many elements? Okay.
I'll come back with.
This box. Remember, I copied it 3 times. So we have 3 of those parent boxes now. We have this number 1, Then we have this number 2, then we have this number 3. They're actually 3, isn't it? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, now they are 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I copied it 3 times. So what I'm trying to show you now is the fact that there's actually a provision in CSS for you to be able to select an element that is a first of its type. Does that make sense? So the way you do that is by, working with something they call pseudo classes. So we have a parent box, and then you want to, when you want to use pseudo classes are classes that don't exist virtually. That is, they don't exist. You didn't write them, but they actually exist on every element, and you can use them to do some very interesting things. For instance, I'm about to select the parent box that is the first child of the body, and this is how I'm going to do that. So I'll do first child here of the body. So doing the first child of the body, I'm going to do margin above 180 pixels. Okay, so that is this class now. Let's inspect it. So, but that so that is so. For some reason, it's not recognizing that. So instead of parent box, I think it will basically. Okay. So the parent box that is the first element. So that's what that pseudo class does. But for some reasons, it just pushes everything away. So I think one other thing I need to do to share this is to set the background